Nouriel Roubini, thank you very much for talking to Business Spectator. Well, you're here this morning, of course, in Perth, speaking to CHOGM, and in your key address to the forum this morning, quite a negative presentation in that you believe the chance of a double-dip recession remains in both the US and Europe. Has anything in the last fortnight changed your view? We've had quite strong equity markets.
Well, in the last 10 days or 2 weeks, global markets that had sharply fallen in August and September have gone up, and have gone up for two reasons. One is that there is a hope that the European going to come with a plan that is credible. Two, some of the economic data from the United States have been slightly better, reducing the concerns about the double-dip recession. Now, on the first one, as I pointed out, the Europeans are going to come with a plan about Greece, about recapitalizing the banks, and about providing at least some short-term additional liquid support for Italy and Spain through a leveraged EFSF. But I think that over the next few weeks and months, after the first kind of bout of relief, people are going to realize the Eurozone is entering a recession. Yesterday's data on the PMIs from the Eurozones were just awful. And as I pointed out, if there is not going to be economic growth, any financial engineering is not going to be sustainable. Even reducing the debts, like in Greece, resolves your debt problem. It doesn't resolve your competitiveness problem. To have a competitiveness restoration, you need the economic growth, you need the real depreciation, you need a much weaker euro. That's not going to happen, and eventually people are going to realize this is not sustainable, and we're going to go back to risk off as opposed to risk on. And even the data from the United States, in my view, are mixed. Many of them are still poor. The first estimate of US GDP growth are biased always upward because they come from sample of larger companies and larger retailers who are doing well, while indicators coming from smaller retailers and smaller companies suggest that they are in a depression. So there's a bias in the initial estimates of growth data. So GDP growth in the US might come out 2.5%. First estimate for Q3 is going to be revised downward over time. The same reason why first quarter GDP came out 1.5%, then was revised to 0.4 when we got then new data. So I think US economy is much weaker than people are making it. So I think that rally is going to fizzle out.
Could I ask a domestic question, an Australian question, which you haven't been asked yet? It's probably the overarching question in Australia, apart from our dependence on China, is whether our house prices, Australian house prices, are overvalued in a global context, or indeed they're overvalued in a local context. Have you examined this issue in any way?
Well, I would say, there was a more severe housing bubble, in other countries, US, UK, Ireland, Iceland, Spain, Dubai. In Australia, there were some excesses in housing markets, and there's been a softening in some of them. And I would say Australia is a large country where you have also differential of growth depending on the regions. Of course, the regions of the country that are more resource-oriented are having economic boom, people moving there, and housing is going to be sustained, while of course in Sydney and other parts of the country, the concerns about softening of economic growth, about the global shocks, about excessive leverage of the household sector led initially to a boom in home prices, now a softening of it, so there may be a correction. I think it's a bit more of a correction. I don't think, unless there is a global financial crisis that leads to a severe shock to the Australian economy, that there'll be a severe downturn, but probably there'll be a downturn.
You don't have the opinion, as many local economists are, that it's severely overvalued?
It's overvalued. If economic growth remains sustained, there'll be a correction, and how much of that correction is going to occur depends on how weak the economy is going to be. The economy has some sources of strength, some sources of weakness. So I think a correction is inevitable. In the US, you had a real bust that led to a economic crisis and a financial crisis. The banks here are sounder. The strength of China and emerging Asia helps so far commodities in Australia.
Can I give you a final one?
So it'll be more of a correction in my view.